The storm rolled across the plains like a warning, thunder growling over the fences and lightning splitting the dark sky. And that was when the rancher first saw her standing at the edge of his land, drenched, silent, and steady as a lone cottonwood tree in the wind. She did not shout for help. She did not wave her arms. She simply waited, holding a small worn suitcase against her chest, as if it were the only thing keeping her tied to this earth. The rancher, Caleb Turner, had seen many things in his years on the range: cattle stampeded by lightning, outlaws riding hard for the border, men broken by drought. But he had never seen a woman look so calm in the middle of a storm. Caleb rode closer, his horse's hooves sinking into the muddy ground, and as he approached, he noticed that the woman's eyes were not afraid. They were quiet, observant, almost studying him as much as he studied her. The wind tore at her dark hair, but she did not flinch. She simply stood there with a faint curve of her lips, not a full smile, just a hint of one. And somehow that small expression unsettled him more than any gun drawn in anger. He tipped his hat and spoke over the wind, asking her name, asking where she came from. But she did not answer, not with words. She only looked toward the ranch house in the distance, and then back at him, as though the house itself held her future. Caleb felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had lost his wife years ago, lost his laughter with her, and the ranch had grown quiet since then. Too quiet. Perhaps that was why. He hesitated. Instead of sending this stranger away, the storm began to ease, rain turning to a soft mist, and Caleb finally extended his hand. She did not take it at first. She simply looked at it, then at him, measuring the offer like a cautious trader at a frontier market. At last, she placed her hand in his, and though she was cold from the rain, her grip was firm, steady, and unexpectedly strong. He helped her onto the back of his horse, and together they rode toward the ranch house, while the sky slowly cleared behind them. The ranch hands watched in surprise as Caleb brought the silent woman into the house. Whispers followed them through the barn and across the yard. Men wondered who she was, where she came from, and why she did not speak. But Caleb answered none of their questions. He simply told them she would stay the night, and that was that. Inside the house, he handed her a dry blanket and placed a cup of warm coffee on the table. She accepted both with a grateful nod, her eyes softening as the heat returned to her hands. Days passed, and the woman remained quiet, moving gently through the house like a soft breeze. She helped without being asked, mending torn cloth, arranging the kitchen shelves, tending the small garden behind the house. The ranch hands noticed that their chores seemed lighter somehow, as if her presence brought order without effort. Though she spoke no words, she communicated through gestures, through careful actions, through that same faint smile that appeared whenever someone treated her with kindness. Caleb found himself watching her more than he intended. He would catch her standing by the window at sunset, looking out over the fields as though remembering something far away. Sometimes he tried again to ask about her past, but she would only shake her head gently, not in defiance, but in quiet refusal. And instead of frustration, he felt curiosity. He realized that her silence was not empty. It was full of stories she was not ready to share. One evening, as the ranch settled into twilight, Caleb returned from checking the fences and found her sitting on the porch steps, gazing at the horizon. The sky burned orange and gold, and in that light her face seemed almost glowing. He sat beside her without speaking, letting the evening air wrap around them. After a long moment, she turned to him and smiled more fully than ever before. It was not a timid smile. It was steady and warm, and in that simple expression he felt something shift inside his heart, as though the silence between them had grown comfortable rather than uncertain. And in that quiet understanding, under the wide western sky, Caleb sensed that her presence would change the ranch in ways he had not yet begun to imagine. The ranch settled into a steady rhythm after her arrival. Horses feeding at dawn, fences mended by noon, fires glowing by night. Yet beneath that calm surface, something new had taken root. Caleb noticed the change first in himself. He no longer sat alone at the table in silence, because she was there across from him, pouring coffee with careful hands, offering bread with that gentle smile, the smile that seemed to say more than words ever could. And though she still spoke no sound, her presence filled the house like music drifting through an open window. One afternoon, a rider approached the ranch with urgency, a messenger from town carrying news of trouble along the supply route. Rustlers had been seen near the northern hills, and several families were worried about missing cattle. Caleb listened carefully, his jaw tightening as he considered the threat. The ranch had survived hardship before, but rustlers could strip a man's livelihood in a single night. As he prepared to ride out and investigate, he noticed the silent woman watching him from the doorway, concern in her eyes but no panic, only steady resolve before leaving. Caleb hesitated, unsure why he felt the need to explain himself to her. Yet he found himself speaking anyway, telling her he would return by dusk, telling her not to worry. She stepped closer and gently adjusted his collar, a simple gesture that carried unexpected warmth. Then she placed her hand briefly over his heart and smiled, as if to wish him safety without needing words. That quiet touch lingered with him long after he rode away, and he realized that her silence carried strength rather than weakness. The ride toward the hills was long and tense, the air thick with dust and suspicion. Caleb and the ranch hands found signs of fresh tracks near the creek, evidence that someone had moved cattle through the area recently, but no rustlers were visible. As the sun dipped lower, Caleb felt the weight of responsibility pressing harder, yet in his mind, he kept seeing her face at the doorway, steady and calm, and that memory steadied him in return, reminding him that fear should never lead the way. When Caleb returned that evening, the ranch house lights were glowing warmly, and from a distance he could see her standing on the porch, waiting. The moment she spotted him, her face brightened with unmistakable relief, and though she did not run or cry out, the speed of her steps toward him told him everything. She met him halfway across the yard, inspecting him carefully as if checking for injuries, then nodded in approval when she saw he was unharmed. Her smile widened, and for the first time, Caleb felt truly seen. Over the following weeks, the rustler problem continued, and Caleb found himself relying more on her instincts than he expected. She had an uncanny way of noticing details others missed. A broken latch on a barn door, fresh hoofprints near the outer fence, smoke rising faintly from distant hills. She would point or gesture, and the ranch hands learned to trust her signals. Her silence became a form of guidance, and Caleb realized she possessed a sharp mind beneath that quiet exterior. One evening, as they reviewed maps spread across the kitchen table, she surprised Caleb by taking a pencil and sketching a simple diagram of the northern hills, marking paths with careful lines. She indicated where the rustlers might hide, showing a narrow pass between rocky outcrops. Caleb studied the drawing closely, impressed by her clarity, and when he looked up at her, she met his gaze with confidence, her smile carrying a spark of determination that matched his own with her guidance. Caleb organized a plan to secure the cattle and protect the ranch. The men worked together to reinforce the fences and set watch through the night, and when the rustlers attempted another raid, they found the ranch prepared and alert. The confrontation was brief but decisive, and by dawn, the threat had retreated beyond the hills. As the sun rose over the fields, Caleb stood beside her in the golden light, realizing that her silence had not been emptiness at all. It had been patience, courage, and strength woven together. And as she looked at the peaceful land before them and smiled, he understood that the ranch was no longer just his home, it was becoming theirs. The ranch felt different after the rustlers vanished, not louder, not busier, but steadier, as if the land itself had accepted her as part of its rhythm. Caleb noticed how the horses calmed when she walked through the corral, how the ranch hands softened their tone around her. They no longer questioned her silence, because they had seen her courage. Yet Caleb still wondered about the story she carried inside. He sensed it was heavy, like a locked chest buried deep in the earth, and though he longed to know, he waited for her to choose the moment. One evening, as the fire burned low and the wind whispered across the prairie, she surprised him by placing an old photograph on the table. It was worn and faded, showing a small town home and a familiar-looking woman standing beside it. Her eyes met Caleb's, and this time she spoke, not with many words, but with a single soft sentence, her voice quiet yet clear. She had not lost her ability to speak, she had chosen silence for protection. Fleeing a troubled past where threats followed her steps, Caleb listened without interruption, realizing that her silence had been a shield, not a barrier. She explained that the men who had once controlled her former town had tried to force her into a marriage she did not want, and when she refused, they made her life unsafe. She had left in the night, traveling far until she reached his ranch during the storm. Her smile that day had not been fearlessness, it had been relief. Relief at finding a place where she could finally breathe. As she finished speaking, the room felt still, not heavy, but respectful. Caleb felt anger toward those who had driven her away. Yet he also felt admiration for her strength. She had crossed miles alone, endured hardship without complaint, and rebuilt herself in quiet dignity. He reached across the table and gently took her hand, promising that no one would ever control her again while she lived under his roof. And for the first time, she smiled without hesitation, a full and radiant expression that seemed to brighten the entire room. The days that followed carried a new warmth, not only in the weather but in their bond. Caleb no longer saw her as a guest, and she no longer moved as someone uncertain of her place. They worked side by side, repairing fences, planning improvements, and expanding the garden. The ranch hands noticed how their leader had changed. He laughed more often, spoke with renewed energy, and carried himself with confidence. It was as if her presence had awakened something long asleep within him one afternoon. While watching the sunset together, Caleb realized that love had quietly grown between them, not through grand declarations, but through shared labor, shared danger, and shared silence. He turned to her and told her he did not need many words to understand her, because her actions spoke clearly. He told her she had become the heart of the ranch, and though she lowered her eyes shyly, her smile returned, steady and certain, telling him that she felt the same months later. The ranch held a small gathering. Ranch hands, neighbors, and friends came together to celebrate the successful harvest and the peace that had returned to the hills. Caleb stood beside her in front of everyone and introduced her not as a stranger, but as his partner in every sense. The crowd applauded warmly, having witnessed her contributions and strength, and when she finally addressed them in a clear voice, thanking them for accepting her, many were moved by the courage it took for her to speak openly after so long. As night settled over the plains and lanterns glowed around the yard, Caleb and she stood alone beneath the vast western sky, the same sky under which she had first arrived during the storm. He remembered that day vividly, the silence, the rain, the uncertain future. Now the storm felt like a distant memory. She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder and smiled, not with words, but with presence. And in that moment Caleb understood the truth that had carried them here. Her smile had always spoken louder than words, guiding him, strengthening the ranch, and building a home where silence had turned into understanding, and strangers had become family.